What's up, mystery lovers? In today's video, I'll be reading more stories from the adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And, well, try not to fumble over my words over and over again. If you're part of the percentage that hasn't already subscribe and enjoy. When I glance over my notes and records of the Sherlock Holmes cases between the year 82 and 90, I am faced by so many which present strange and interesting features that it is no easy matter to know which to choose and which to leave. Some, however, have already gained publicity through the papers, and others have not offered a field for those particular qualities which my friend possesses in so high a degree, and which it is the object of these papers to illustrate. Some too have baffled his analytical skills and would be as narratives, beginnings without an ending, while others have been but particularly cleared up and have their explanations founded rather upon conjecture and surmise than on that absolute logical proof which was so dear to him. There is, however, one of these last which was so remarkable in its details and so startling in its results that I am tempted to give some account of it, in spite of the fact that there are points in connection with it which never have been, and probably never will be, entirely cleared up. The year 87 furnished us with a long series of cases, greater or less interest, of which I retained the records. Among my headings, under this 12 months, I find an account of the adventure of the Parado Chamber, of the Amateur Maintenance Society, who held a luxurious club in the lower vault of a furniture warehouse, of the facts connected with the loss of the British barque Sophie Anderson, of the singular adventures of the Grice Pattersons in the island of Ufa, and finally of the Camberwell poisoning case. In the latter, as may be remembered, Sherlock Holmes was able by winding up the dead man's watch to prove that it had been wound up 2 hours before, and that therefore the deceased had gone to bed within that time. A deduction which was of the greatest importance in clearing up the case. All these I may sketch out at some future date, but none of them present such singular features as the strange train of circumstances which I have now taken up my pen to describe. It was in the latter days of September, and the equinoctial gales had set in with exceptional violence. All days the wind had screamed and the rain had beaten against the windows, that even here in the heart of great handmade London we were forced to raise our minds for the instant from the rotation of life and to recognize the presence of those great elemental forces which shriek at mankind through the bars of his dwelling station like untamed beasts in a cage. As evening drew in, the storm grew higher and louder, and the wind cried and sobbed like a child in the chimney. Sherlock Holmes sat moodily at one side of the fireplace, cross-indexing his records of crime. I, at the other, was deep in one of the Clark of Russell's fine sea stories until the howl of the gale from without seemed to blend with the text, and the splash of the rain to lengthen out into the long swash of the sea waves. My wife was on a visit to her mother's, and for a few days I was a dweller once more in my old quarters at Baker Street. Why? Said I, glancing up at my companion. There was surely the bell. Who could come tonight? Some friend of yours, perhaps? Except yourself, I have none, he answered. I do not encourage visitors. A client, then? If so, it is a serious case. Nothing less will bring a man out on such a day and at such an hour. But I take it that it is more likely to be some crony of the landlady's. Sherlock Holmes was wrong in his conjecture, however, for there came a step in the passage, and a tapping at the door. He stretched out his long arm to turn the lamp away from himself and towards the vacant chair upon which a newcomer must sit. Come in, said he. The man who entered was young, some 22, at the outside, well-groomed, trimly clad, with something of refinement and delicacy in his bearing. The streaming umbrella which he held in his hand, and his long, shiny waterproof, told of the fierce weather through which he had come. He looked about him anxiously in the glare of the lamp, and I could see that his face was pale and his eyes heavy, like those of a man who was weighed down with some great anxiety. I owe you an apology, he said, raising his golden business to his eyes. I trust that I am not intruding. I fear that I have brought some traces of the storm and rain into your snug chamber. Give me your coat and umbrella, said Holmes. They may rest here on the hook, and will be dry presently. You have come up from the southwest, I see. Yes, from Horsham. That clay and chalk mixture which I see upon the toe caps is quite distinctive. I have come for advice. That is easily got. And help. That is not so easy. I had heard of you, Mr. Holmes. I heard from Major Prendergast how you saved him in the Tankersville Club scandal. Ah, of course. He was wrongfully accused of cheating at cards. He said that you could solve anything. He said too much. That you are never beaten. I have been beaten 4 times. 3 times by men, and 1 by a woman. But what is that compared with the number of your successes? It is true that I have been generally successful. Then you may be so with me. I beg that you draw your chair up to the fire and favor me with some details as to your case. It is no ordinary one. None of those which come to me are. I am the last court of appeal. And yet I question, sir, whether in all your experience you have ever listen to a more mysterious and inexplicable chain of events than those which have happened in my own family. You fill me with interest, said Holmes. Pray, give us the essential facts from the commencement, and I can afterwards question you as to those details which seem to me to be most important. The man pulled his chair up and pushed his wet feet out towards the blaze. My name, said he, is John Openshaw, but my own affairs have, as far as I can understand, little to do with this awful business. It is a hereditary matter, so in order to give you an idea of the facts, I must go back to the commencement of the affair. You must know that my grandfather had 2 sons, my uncle Elias and my father Joseph. My father had a small factory at Coventry, which he enlarged at the time of the invention of bicycling. He was patentee of the Openshaw unbreakable tire, and his business met with such success that he was able to sell it and to retire about a handsome complement. My uncle Elias immigrated to America when he was a young man and became a planter in Florida, where he was reported to have done very well. At the time of the war, he fought in Jackson's army and afterwards under Hood, where he rose to be a colonel. When Lee laid down his arms, my uncle returned to his plantation, where he remained for 3 or 4 years. About 1869, hold on, I said 1869 or 1870, he came back to Europe and took a small estate in Sussex near Wisham. He had made a very considerable fortune in the States. And his return for leaving them was his aversion to the Negroes and his dislike of the Republican policy in extending the franchise to them. He was a singular man, fierce and quick-tempered, very foul-mouthed when he was angry, and a most retiring disposition. During all the years that he lived at Wisham, I doubt if ever he set foot in the town. He had a garden, or 2 or 3 fields round his house, and there he would take his exercise, though very often for weeks on end, and he would never leave his room. He drank a great deal of brandy, and smoked very heavily. But he would see no society and did not want any friends, not even his own brother. He didn't mind me, in fact. He took a fancy to me, for at the time when he saw me first, I was a youngster of 12 or so. This would be in the year 1878, after he had been 8 or 9 years in England. He begged my father to let me live with him, and he was very kind to me in his way. When he was sober, he used to be fond of playing backgammon and draughts with me, and he would make me his representative both with the servants and with the tradespeople, so that by the time that I was 16, I was quite master of the house. I kept all the keys and could go where I liked and do what I liked. so long as I do not disturb him in his privacy. There was one singular exception, however, where he had a single room, a lumber room, up among the attic, which was invariably locked, and which he would never permit either me or anyone else to enter. With the boy's curiosity, I had peeped through the keyhole, but I was never able to see more than such a collection of old trunks and bundles as would be expected in such a room. One day, it was in March 1883, a letter with a foreign stamp lay upon the table in front of the colonel's plate. It was not a common thing for him to receive letters, for his bills were all paid in ready money, and he had no friends of any sorts. "From India," said he, as he took it up. "Pondicherry postmark. What can this be?" Opening it hurriedly, out there jumped 5 blue dried orange pips, which pattered down upon his plate. I began to laugh at that, but the laugh was stuck from my lips at the sight of his face. His lips had fallen, his eyes were protruding, his skin the color of putty, and he glared at the envelope, which he still held in his trembling hands. "KKK," he shrieked, and then, my God, my sins have overtaken me." "What is it, Uncle?" I cried. "Death," said he, and rising from the table, he retired to his room, leaving me pittering with horror. I took up the envelope and saw scrawled in red ink upon the inner flap, just above the gum, the letter K, 3 times repeated. There was nothing else save the 5 dried pips, which could be the reason of his overpowering terror. I left the breakfast table, and as I ascended the stair, I met him coming down with an old rusty key, which must have belonged to the attic, in one hand, and a small brass box like a cash box in the other. "They may do what they like, but I'll checkmate them still," said he with an oath. "Tell Mary that I shall want a fire in my room today, and send down to Fordham, the Wortham lawyer." I did as he ordered, and when the lawyer arrived, I was asked to step up to the room. Fire was burning brightly, and in the grate there was a mass of black, fluffy ashes, as of burned paper, while the brass box stood open and empty beside it. As I glanced at the box, I noticed with a start that upon the lid was printed the triple K, which I had heard in the morning upon the envelope. "I wish you, John," said my uncle, "to witness my will. I leave my estate, with all its adventures and all its disadvantages, to my brother, your father, whence it will, no doubt, descend to you. If you can enjoy it in peace, well and good. If you find you cannot, take my advice, my boy, and leave it to your deadliest enemy. I am sorry to give you such a two-edged thing, but I can't say what turn things are going to take. Kindly sign the paper where Mr. Fordham shows you." I signed the paper as directed, and the lawyer took it away with him. The singular incident made, as you may think, the deepest impression upon me, and I pondered over it and turned it every way in my mind, without being able to make anything of it. Yet, I could not shake off the vague feeling of dread, which it left behind, though the sensation grew less keen as the weeks passed and nothing happened to disturb the usual routine of our lives. I could see a change in my uncle, however. He drank more than ever, and he was less inclined for any sort of society. Most of his time he would spend in his room, with the door locked upon the inside. Sometimes he would emerge in a sort of drunken frenzy and would burst out of the house and tear about the garden with a revolver in his hand, screaming out that he was afraid of no man, and that he was not to be cooped up like a sheep in a pen. By man or devil? I wonder what he's barking at now. When those hot fits were over, however, he would rush tumultuously in at the door and lock and bar it behind him, like a man who can reason it out no longer against the terror which lies at the root of his soul. At such times I have seen his face, even on a cold day, glisten with moisture, as though it were new raised from a basin. Well, to come to an end of the matter, Mr. Holmes, and not to abuse your presence, there came a night when he made one of those drunken sallies from which he never came back. We found him when we went to search for him, face downward, in a little green scummed pool which lay at the foot of the garden. There was no sign of any violence, and the water was but 2 feet deep, so that the injury, having regard to, is known as such trickery brought in a vertical suicide. But I, who knew how he winced from the very thought of death, had much ado to persuade myself that he had gone out of his own way to meet it. The matter passed, however, and my father entered into possession of the estates, and of some £14,000 which lay to his credit at the bank. One moment, Holmes interposed. Your statement is, I foresee, one of the most remarkable to which I have ever listened. Let me have the date of the reception by your uncle of the letter and the date of his supposed suicide. The letter arrived on March 10th, 1883. His death was 7 weeks later, upon the night of May 2nd. Thank you. Pray proceed. When my father took over the Horsham property, he, at my request, made a careful examination of the attic, which had been always locked up. He found the brass box there, although its contents had been destroyed. On the inside of the cover was a paper label with the initials of the KKK repeated upon it, and the letters memoranda, receipts, and a register written beneath. These, we presumed, indicated the nature of the papers, which had been destroyed by Colonel Opacha. For the rest, there was nothing of much importance in the attic, save a great many scattered papers and notebooks bearing upon my uncle's life in America. Some of them were of the wartime and show that he had done his duty well and had borne the repute of a brave soldier. Others were of a date during the reconstruction of the southern states and were mostly concerned with politics, for he had evidently taken a strong part in opposing the carpetbag politicians who had been sent down from the north. Well, it was the beginning of '84 when my father came to live at Horsham, and all went as well as possible with us until the January of '85. On the 4th day after New Year, I heard my father give a sharp cry of surprise, and we sat together at the breakfast table. There he was, sitting with a newly opened envelope in one hand and 5 dry open pads in the outstretched palm of the other one. He had always laughed at what he called a cock and bull story about the colonel, but he looked very scared and puzzled now that the same thing had come upon himself. "Why? What on earth does this mean, John?" he stammered. My heart had turned to lead. "It is KKK," said I. He looked inside the envelope. "So it is," he cried. "Here are the little letters, but what is this written above them?" "Put the papers on the sundial," I read, peeping over his shoulder. "What papers?" "What sundial?" he asked. "The sundial in the garden." "There is no other," said I, "but the papers must be those that are destroyed." "Phew, phew," said he, gripping hard at his courage. "We are in a civilized land here. We can't have tomfoolery of this kind. Where does the thing come from?" "From Dundee," I answered, glancing at the postmark. "Some preposterous practical joke," said he. "What have I to do with sundials and paper? I'll take no notice of such nonsense." "I should certainly speak to the police," said I. "And be laughed at? For my pains? Nothing of the sort." "Then let me do so." "No, I forbid you. I won't have a fuss made about such nonsense." It was in vain to argue with him, for he was a very absent man. I went about, however, with a heart which was full of foreboding. On the 3rd day after the coming of the letter, my father went from home to visit an old friend of his, Major Freebody, who was in command of one of the forts upon Portsdown Hill. It was good that he should go, for it seemed to me that he was farther from danger when he was away from the house, away from home. And that, however, I was in error. Upon the 2nd day of his absence, I received a telegram from the major, imploring me to come at once. My father had fallen over of the deep chalk pits, which adjoined the neighborhood, and was lying senseless with a shattered skull. I hurried to him, but he passed away without having ever recovered his consciousness. He had, as it appears, been returning from Fareham in the twilight, and as the country was unknown to him, and the chalk pits unfenced, the jury had no hesitation in bringing in a verdict of death from accidental causes. Carefully as I examined every fact connected with his death, I was unable to find anything which could suggest the idea of murder. There was no sign of violence, no footmarks, no robbery, no records of strangers having been seen upon the roads. And yet, I need not tell you that my mind was far from at ease, and that I was well nigh certain that some foul plot had been woven round him. And this sinister way I came into my inheritance. You'll ask me why I did not dispose of it. I answered because I was never convinced that our troubles were in some way dependent upon an incident in my uncle's life, and that the danger would be as pressing in one's house as in another. It was in January 85 that my poor father met his end, and 2 years and 8 months had elapsed since then. During that time, I have lived happily with him, and I had begun to hope that this curse had passed away from the family, and that it had ended with the last generation. I had begun to take comfort too soon, however. Yesterday morning, the blow fell in the very shape in which it had come upon my father. The young man took from his waistcoat a crumpled envelope. Turning it to the table, he shook out upon 5 little dried orange pits. This is the envelope, he continued. The postmark is London, Eastern Division. Within are the very words which were upon my father's last message. KKK. And then put the papers on the sundial. What have you done? Asked Holmes. Nothing. Nothing. To tell the truth, he sank his face into his thin white hands. I had felt hopeless. I had felt like one of those poor rabbits with the snake is withering towards it. I seemed to be in the grasp of some resistless and discernible evil which no foresight and no precautions can guard against. Tut tut, cried Sherlock Holmes. You must act, man, or you are lost. Nothing but energy could save you. This is no time for despair. I have seen the police. But they listened to my story with a smile. I am convinced that the inspector has formed the opinion that the letters are all practical jokes, and that the deaths of my relations were really accidents, as the jury stated, and were not to be connected with the warnings. Holmes shook his clenched hands in the air. Incredible. He likes calling everyone imbeciles. I noticed that. Holmes shook his clenched hands in the air. Incredible imbeciles, he cried. They have, however, allowed me a policeman who may remain in the house with me. Has he come with you tonight? No. His orders were to stay in the house. Again, Holmes raved in the air. Why did you come to me? He cried. And above all, why did you not come at once? I did not know. It was only today that I spoke to Major Prendergast about my troubles and was advised by him to come to you. It is really 2 days since you had the letter. We should have acted before this. You have no further evidence, I suppose, that which you have placed before us, no suggestive details which may help us. There is one thing, said John Openshaw. He rummaged his coat pocket. Trevor, thank you so much for checking in. He rummaged in his coat pocket and drawing out a piece of discolored blue tinted paper, he laid it out upon the table. I have some remembrance, said he, that on the day when my uncle burned the papers, I observed that the small unburned margins which lay amid the ashes were of this particular color. I found this singular sheet upon the floor of his room, and I am inclined to think that it may be one of the papers which has perhaps fluttered out from among the others, and in that way has escaped destruction. Upon the mention of pips, I did not see that it helps us much. I think myself that it is a page from some private diary. The writing is undoubtedly my uncle's. Holmes moved the lamp, and we both bent over the sheet of paper, which showed by its ragged edge that it had indeed been torn from a book. It was headed March 1869, and beneath were the following anecdotal notes. 4th, Hudson came, same old platform. 7th, set the pits on Macaulay, Paramore, and John Swines at St. Augustine. 9th, Macaulay cleared. 10th, John Swines cleared. 12th, visited Paramore. Oh well. Thank you, said Holmes, folding the paper and returning to our visitor. And now you must, on no account, lose another instance. We cannot spare time even to discuss what you have told me. If you must get home instantly and act, what shall I do? There is but one thing to do. It must be done at once. You must put this piece of paper which you have shown us into the brass box which you have described. You must also put in a note to say that all the other papers were burned by your uncle, and that this is the only one which remains. You must assert that in such words as will carry conviction with them. Having done this, you must at once put the box out upon the sundial as directed. Do you understand? Entirely. Do not think of revenge or anything of the sort at present. I think that we may gain that by means of the law, but we have our web to weave, while theirs is already woven. The first consideration is to remove the pressing danger which threatens you. The second is to clear up the mystery and to punish the guilty parties. I thank you, said the young man, raised and pulling on his overcoat. Zach, hi. You have given me fresh life and hope. I shall certainly do as you advise. Do not lose an instant, and above all, take care of yourself in the meanwhile, for I do not think that there can be a doubt that you are threatened by a very real and admitted danger. How do you go back? By train from Waterloo. It is not yet 9. The streets will be crowded, so I trust that you may be in safely. And yet, you cannot guard yourself too closely. I am armed. That is well. Tomorrow, I shall set to work upon your case. I shall see you at Horsham then? No. Your secret lies in London. It is there that I shall seek it. Then I shall call upon you in a day, or in 2 days, with news as to the box and the papers. I shall take your advice in every particular. He shook hands with us and took his leave. Outside, the wind still screamed and the rain splashed and pattered against the window. The strange, wild story seemed to have come to us upon amid the mad element, blown in upon us like a sheet of seaweed in a gale, and now to have been reabsorbed by them once more. Sherlock Holmes sat for some time in silence, with his head sunk forward and his eyes bent upon the red glow of the fire. Then he lit his pipe, and leaning back in his chair, he watched the blue smoke ring as they chased each other up to the ceiling. I think, Watson, he remarked at once, that of all our cases, we have had none more fantastic than this. Save perhaps the sign of 4? Oh, well, yes, save perhaps that, and yet this John Openshaw seems to me to be walking amid even greater perils than did the charlatans. But have you, I asked, formed any definite conception as to what these perils are? There can be no question as to their nature, he answered. Then what are they? Who is this KKK? And why does he pursue this unhappy family? Sherlock Holmes closed his eyes and placed his elbows upon the arm of his chair, with his fingers tips together. The ideal reasoner, he remarked, would, when he had once been shown a single fact and all its bearings, deduce from it not only all the chain of events which led up to it, but also all the results which would follow from it. As Carver would correctly describe a whole animal by the contemplation of a single bone, so the observer who has thoroughly understood one link in a series of incidents should be able to accurately see all the other ones, both before and after. We have not yet crafted the results, which the readers alone can attain the problems may be solved in the study, which have baffled all those who have sought a solution by the aid of their senses. To carry the art, however, to its highest pitch, it is necessary that the reasoner should be able to utilize all the facts which have come to his knowledge. And this, in itself, implies, as you will readily see, a possession of all knowledge, which, even in these days of free education and in encyclopedias, is a somewhat rare accomplishment. It is not so impossible, however, that a man should possess all knowledge which is likely to be useful to him in his work. And this I have endeavored in my case to do. If I remember rightly, you, on one occasion in the early days of our friendship, defined my limits in a very precise fashion. Yes, I answered, laughing. It was a singular document. Philosophy, astronomy, and politics were marked at 0, I remember. Botany, a variable, geology profound as regards the mud stained from any region within 50 miles of town. Chemistry, centric, anatomy, synthetic, sensational literature, and crime records unique. Violin player, boxer, swordsman, lawyer, and self-poisoner by cocaine and tobacco. That was a mouthful. Those, I think, were the main points of my analysis. Holmes grinned at the last item. Well, he said, I say no, as I say that a man should keep his little brain attic stocked with all the furniture that he is likely to use, and the rest he can put away in the lumber room of his library, where he can get it if he wants. Now, were such a case as the one which has been submitted to us tonight, we need certainly to muster all other resources. Kindly hand me down the letter K of the American Encyclopedia, which stands upon the shelf beside you. Thank you. Now let us consider the situation and see what may be deducted from it. In the first place, we may start with a strong assumption that Colonel Pupichal had some very strong reasons for leaving America. Men at this time of life do not change all their habits and exchange willingly the charming climate of Florida for the lonely life of an English provincial town. His extreme love of solitude in England suggests the idea that he was in fear of someone or something. So we may assume, as a working hypothesis, that it was fear of someone or something which drove him from America. As to what it was he feared, we could only deduce that by considering the formidable letters which were received by himself and his successors. Do you remark the postmark of those letters? The first was from Howdy Cherry, the second from Dundee, and the third from London. From East London. What do you deduce from that? They are all seaports that the writer was on board of a ship. Excellent. We have already a clue. There can be no doubt that the strong probability that the writer was on board of a ship. And now, let us consider another point. In the case of Pondicherry, 7 weeks elapsed between the threat and its fulfillment. In Dundee, it was only some 3 or 4 days. Does that suggest anything? A greater distance to travel? But the letter had also a greater distance to come. Then I do not see the point. There is at least a presumption that the vessel in which the man or men are in a sailing ship. It looks as if they always send their singular warning or token before them when starting upon their mission. You see how quickly the deed followed the sign when it came from Dundee? If they had come from Pondicherry in a steamer, they would have arrived almost as soon as their letter. But, as a matter of fact, 7 weeks elapsed. I think that those 7 weeks represented the difference between the mail boat, which brought the letter, and the sailing vessel, which brought the writer. It is possible. More than that, it is probable. And now you see the deadly urgency of this new case, and why I urge young Opachak to caution. The blow has always fallen at the end of the time, which it would take the senders to travel the distance. But this one comes from London, therefore we cannot count upon delay. Good God, I cried. What can it mean? This relentless, this relentless persecution. The papers which Opachak carried are obviously a vital importance to the person or persons in the sailing ship. I think that it is quite clear there must be more than one of them. A single man could not have carried out 2 deaths in such a way as to deceive a coroner's jury. There must have been several in it. It must have been men of resource determination. The papers they mean to have be the holder of them, who it may. And this way you see KKK ceases to be the initials of an individual and becomes the badge of a society. But of what society? Have you never, said Sherlock Holmes, bending forward and sticking his voice, have you never heard of the Ku Klux Klan? I never have. Holmes turned over the leaves of a book upon his knee. Here it is, he said presently. Ku Klux Klan, a name derived from the... was the KKK not a dead giveaway? Yeah. We're going back in time, peoples. To the, 18-something? I think they're referring to this is being the 1800s? And they're having the colonel who served in one of the wars in America. He came to England. He ended up being killed in England. And then the literals keep saying KKK, so it was kind of obvious they're talking about the Ku Klux Klan. Now, if it's based on real history, probably not. It might be just referenced during the time period, though. The Ku Klux Klan, a name derived from the fanciful resemblance to the sound produced by cocking a rifle. Their terrible secret society was formed by some ex-Confederate soldiers in the southern states after the Civil War, and they rapidly formed local branches in different parts of the country, notably in Tennessee, Louisiana, the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. Its power was used for political purposes, particularly for the terrorizing of the Negro voters and the murdering and driving from the country of those who were opposed to his viewers. Its outrages were ultimately preceded by a warning sent to the marked man in some fantastic but generally recognized shape. A sprig of oak leaves in some parts, melon seeds or orange pits in others. On receiving this, the victim must entirely, openly abjure of his former ways, or might fly from the country. If he braved the matter out, death would unfavorably come upon him, and usually in some strange and unforeseen manner. So perfect was the organization of society and so symptomatic in its methods that there is hardly a case upon record where any man succeeded in braving it with impunity, or which any of its outrages were traced home to the perpetrators. For some years, the organization flourished in spite of the efforts of the United States, a government, and of the better classes of the community in the South. Eventually, in the year 1869, the movement rather suddenly collapsed, although there have been sporadic outbreaks of the same sort of since that date. You will observe, said Holmes, laying down the volume, that the sudden breaking up of society was coincided with the disappearance of Openshaw from America with their papers. It may well have been cause and effect. It is no wonder that he and his family have some sort of more implacable spirits upon their track. You can understand that this registered diary may implicate some of the first men in the South, and that there may be many who will not sleep easy at night until it is recovered. Then the page we have seen is such as we might expect. It rang, if I remember right, sent the pits to A, B, and C. That is, sent the society's warning to them. Then there are the successive entries that A and B cleared or left the country, and finally that C was visited with, I fear, a sinister result for C, which I think, Doctor, that we may let some light into the dark place. And I believe that the only change young Openshaw has in the meantime is to do what I have told him. There is nothing more to be said or to be done tonight. But hand me over my violin and let us try to forget, for half an hour, the miserable weather and the still more miserable ways of our fellow men. It had cleared in the morning, and the sun was shining with a subdued brightness through the dim veil which hangs over the great city. Sherlock Holmes was already at breakfast when I came down. You will excuse me for not waiting for you, said he. I foresee a very busy day before me in looking into this case of the Openshaws. What steps will you take? I asked. It will very much depend upon the results of my first inquiries. I may have to go down to where's Ham after all? You will not go there first? No, I shall commence with the city. Just ring the bell and the maid will bring up your coffee. As I waited, I lifted the unopened newspaper from the table and glanced my eyes over it. It rested upon a heading which sent a chill to my heart. Holmes, I cried. You are too late. Ah, said he, laying down his cup. I feared as much. How was it done? He spoke calmly, but I could see that he was deeply moved. My eye caught the name of Opacha and the heading Tragedy near Waterloo Bridge. Here is the account. Between 9 and 10 last night, Police Constable Cock of the H Division on duty near Waterloo Bridge heard a cry for help and a splash in the water. The night, however, was extremely dark and stormy, so that in spite of the help of several passerbys, it was quite possible to effect a rescue. The alarm, however, was given, and by the aid of the water police, the body was eventually recovered. It proved to be that of the young gentleman whose name, as it appears from an envelope which was found in his pocket, was John Openshaw, and whose residence is near Horsham. It is conjectured that he may have been hurrying down to catch the last train for Waterloo Station, and that, in his haste in the extreme darkness, he missed his path and walked over the edge of one of the small landing places for river steamboats. The body exhibited no traces of violence, and there can be no doubt that the deceased had been the victim of an unfortunate accident, which should have the effect of calling the attention of the authorities to the condition of the riverside landing stages. Damn, the client is dead. We sat and sat for a few minutes, Holmes more depressed and shaken than I had ever seen him. That hurts my pride, Watson, he said at last. It is a petty feeling, no doubt, but it hurts my pride. It becomes a personal matter with me now, and if God sends me help, I shall set my hands upon this gang. That he should come to me for help, and that I should send him away to his death. He sprung from his chair and paced about the room in uncontrollable agitation, with a flush upon his shallow cheeks and a nervous clasp and unclasping of his long, thin hands. They must be cunning devils, he exclaimed at last. How could they have decoyed him down there? The embankment is not on the direct line to the station. The bridge, no doubt, was too crowded, even on such a night, for this purpose. Well, Watson, we shall see who will win in the long run. I am going out now. To the police? No, I shall be my own police. When I have spun the web, they may take the flies, but not before. All day I was engaged in my professional work, and it was late in the evening before I returned to Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes had not come back yet. It was nearly 10 o'clock before he entered, looking pale and worn. He walked up to the sideboard, and tearing a piece from the loaf, he devoured it voraciously, washing it down with a long draught of water. You are hungry, I remarked. Starving. It had escaped my memory. I have had nothing since breakfast. Nothing? Not a bite. I had no time to think of it. And how have you succeeded? Well, you have a clue? I have them in the hollow of my hand. Young Openshaw shall not long remain unavenged. Why, Watson, let us put our own devilish trademark upon them. It is well thought of. What do you mean? He took an orange from the cupboard, and tearing it into pieces, he squeezed out the pits upon the table. Of those, he took 5 and thrust them into an envelope. On the inside of the flap, he wrote S.H. or J.O. for J.O. Then he sealed it and addressed it to Captain James Callahan, Barq Lone Star, Savannah, Georgia. That will await him when he enters port, said he, chuckling. It may give him a sleepless night. He will find it as sure as a persecutor of his fate as Obishaw did before him. And who is this Captain Colhorn, the leader of the gang? I shall have the others, but he first. Ooh, he's on a warpath right now. Damn. How did you trace it then? He took a large sheet of paper from his pocket, all covered with dates and names. I have spent the whole day, said he, over Lloyd's registers and files of the old papers, following the future career of every vessel which touched at Pondicherry in January and February in '83. There were 36 ships of fair tonnage which were reported there during those months. Of these, one, the Lone Star, instantly attracted my attention since, although it was reported as having cleared from London, the name is that which is given to one of the states of the Union. Texas, I think. I was not, and I am not sure of which, but I know that the ship must have an American origin. Then what? I searched the Dundee records, and when I found that the Barracuda Lone Star was there in January '85, my suspicions became a certainty. I then inquired as to the vessel which lay at present in the port of London. Yes, the Lone Star had arrived here last week. I went down to the Albert Dock and found that she had been taken down the river by the early tide this morning, homeward bound to Savannah. I wired to Gravesend and learned that she had passed some time ago, and as the wind is easterly, I have no doubt that she is now past the Goodwins and not very far from the Isle of Wight. What will you do then? Oh, I have my hand upon him, and the two mates are, as I learn, the only native-born Americans in the ship. The others are Finns and Germans. I know also that they were all 3 away from the ship last night. I had it from the stevedore, which has been loading their cargo. By the time that their sailing ship reaches Savannah, the mail boat will have carried this letter, and the cable will have informed the police of Savannah that these 3 gentlemen are badly wanted here upon a charge of murder. There is ever a flaw, however, in the best laid of human plans, and the murderers of John Openshaw were never to receive the orange pits, which would show them that another, as cunning and as resolute as themselves, was upon their track. Very long and very severe were the equinoctial gales that year. We waited long for news of the Lone Star of Savannah, but none ever reached us. We did at last hear that somewhere far out in the Atlantic, a shattered stern post of a boat was seen, swinging in the throe of a wave, with the letters LS carved upon it, and that is all which we shall ever know of the fate of the Lone Star. Okay, so Asa Whitney, brother of the late Elias Whitney, D.D., principal of the Theological College of St. George, was more addicted to opium. The habit grew upon him, as I understand, from some foolish freak when he was at college. But having read the Quincy's description of his dream sensations, he had drenched his tobacco with luteum In an attempt to reduce the same effects, he found, as so many more have done, that the practice is easier to attain than to get rid of. And for many years, he continued to be a slave to the drug, an object of mangled horror and pity to his friends' relatives. I can see him now, with yellow, pasty face, drooping lids, and pinpointed pupils, all huddled in a chair, the wreck and ruin of a noble man. One night, it was in June '89, there came a ring to my bell, about the hour when a man gives his first yawn, and glances at the clock. I sat up in my chair and my wife laid her needlework down in her lap and made a little face of disappointment. "A patient?" said she. "We'll have to go out, take a road," for I was newly come back from a weary day. We heard the door open, a few hurried words, and then quick steps upon the liam. Our own door flew open, and a lady clad in some dark-colored stuff, with a black veil, entered the room. "You'll excuse my calling so late," she began, and then suddenly losing her self-control, she ran forward, threw her arms around my wife's neck, and sobbed upon her shoulder. I am in such trouble," she cried. "I do so want a little help." "Oh, why?" said my wife, pulling up her veil. "It is Kate Whitney." How you startled me, Kate. I had no idea who you were when you came in." "I didn't know what to do, so I came straight to you. That was always the way. Folk who were in grief come to my wife like birds to a lighthouse. It was very sweet of you to come. Now you must have some wine and water, and sit here comfortably and tell us all about it. Or should you rather that I send James off to bed?" "Oh, no. What the doctor's advice and hope too. It's about Isa. He has not been home for 2 days. I am so frightened about him." It was not the first time that she had spoken to us about her husband's trouble. To me as a doctor, to my wife as an old friend, school companion. We soothed and comforted her by such words as we could find. Did she know where her husband was? Was it possible that we could bring him back to her? It seemed that it was. She had the surest information that of the late he had, when the fit was on him, made use of the opium den in the farthest east of the city. Hit the road of his orgies had always been confined to one day, and he had come back, twitching and shattering in the evening. Shattering. But now the spell had been upon his 8 and 40 hour, and he lay there, doubtless among the dregs of the docks, breathing in the poison or sleeping off the effects. There he was to be found, she was sure of it, at the Bar of Gold at Upper Swandam Lane. But what was she to do? How could she, a young and timid woman, make her way into such a place and pluck her husband out from among the ruffians who surrounded him? Welcome back! There was the case, and of course there was but one way out of it. Might I not escort her to this place? And then, as a second thought, why should she come at all? I was, Isa Whitney's medical advisor, and as such, I had influence over him. I could manage it better if I were alone. I promised her on my word that I would send him home in a cab within 2 hours, if he were indeed at the address which she had given me. And so, in 10 minutes, I had left my armchair and cheery sitting room behind me and was speeding eastward in a hansom on a strange errand. As it seemed to me at the time, though the future only could show how strange it was to be. But there was no great difficulty in the first stage of my adventure. Upper Spined Lane is a vile alley lurking behind the high wharves which lane the north side of the river, to the east of London Bridge, between a swap shop and a gin shop, approached by a steep flight of steps leading down to a black gap like the mouth of a cave. I found the den of which I was in search, ordering my cab to wait. I passed down the steps, worn hollow in the center, by the senseless tread of drunken feet, and by the light of a flickering oil lamp. Above the door, I found the latch and made my way into a long, low room, thick and heavy with a brown opium smoke, and terraced with wooden berths like the forecastle of an immigrant ship. Through the gloom, one could dimly catch a glimpse of bodies laying in strange, fantastic poses, bowed shoulders, bent knees, heads thrown back, and chins pointing upward, with here and there a dark, lackluster eyes turned upon the newcomer. Out of the black shadow there glimmered little red circles of light, now bright, now faint, as the boiling poison wax or waned in the bowls of the metal pipes. The most lay silent, but some murmured to themselves, and others talked together in a strange, low, monotonous voice, their conversation coming in gushes, and then suddenly trail off into silence. Each murmuring out their own thoughts and paying little heed to the words of their neighbor. At the further end was a small brazier of burned charcoal, beside which, on a three-legged wooden stool there, sat a tall, thin old man, with a straw resting upon his two fists, and his elbows upon his knees staring into the fire. As I entered, a shallow Malay attendant had hurried up with a pipe for me and a supply of the drug, beginning me to an empty berth. Thank you, I have not come to stay, said I. There is a friend of mine here, Mr. Isa Whitney, and I wish to speak with him. There was a moment and an exclamation from my right, and peering through the gloom, I saw Woody's pale, haggard, and unkempt staring out at me. My God, it's Watson, said he. It was in a pitiable state of reaction, with every nerve in the twitter. I say, Watson, what o'clock it is? Really, 11. Of what day? Friday, June 19th. Oh, good heavens. I thought it was Wednesday. It is Wednesday. What do you want to frighten a chap for? He sank his face into his arms and began to sob in a high trembled key. I'll tell you that it is Friday, man. Your wife has been waiting. It's 2 days for you. You should be ashamed of yourself. So I am, but you've got mixed, Watson, for I have only been here a few hours. 3 pipes, 4 pipes, I forgot how many, but I'll go home with you. I wouldn't frighten Kate, poor little Kate. Give me your hand. Have you a cab? Yes, I have one waiting. Then I shall go in it, but I must owe something. Find what I owe, Watson. I am all of color. I can do nothing for myself. I walked down the narrow passage between the double row of sleepers, holding my breath to keep out the vile, superfying fumes of the drug, and looking about for the manager. As I passed the tall man who sat by the brazier, I felt a sudden pluck at my skirt and a low voice whispered, "Oh, walk past me," and then look back at me. The words fell quietly upon my ear. I glanced down. They could only have come from the old man at my side, and yet he sat now as absorbed as ever, very thin, very wrinkled, bent with age, an opium pipe dangling down from between his knees, as though it had dropped in sheer lassitude from his fingers. I took 2 steps forward and looked back. It took all my self-control to prevent me from breaking out into a crying astonishment. He turned his back so that none could see him but I. His form had filled out, his wrinkles were gone, the dull eyes had regained their fire, and there, sitting by the fire and grinning at my surprise, was none other than Sherlock Holmes. He made a slight motion to me to approach him, and instantly as he turned his face half round to the company once more, subsided into dubbering loose lips. Suddenly, Holmes, I whispered, "What on earth are you doing in this den?" "As low as you can," he answered. "I have excellent here. If you would have the great kindness to get rid of that Scottish friend of yours, I should be exceedingly glad to have a little talk with you. I have a cab outside. Then pray send him home in it. You may safely trust him, for he appears to be too limp to get into any mischief. I should recommend you also to send a note by the cabman to your wife to say that you have thrown in your lot with me. If you will wait outside, I shall be with you in 5 minutes." It was difficult to refuse any of Sherlock Holmes' requests, but they were always so exceedingly definite, and put forward with such a quiet air of mastery. I felt, however, that when Whitney was once confined in the cab, my mission was practically accomplished, and for the rest, I could not wish anything better than to be associated with my friend in one of those singular adventures which were the normal condition of his existence. In a few minutes, I had written my note, paid Whitney's bill, led him out to the cab, and seen him driven through the darkness. In a very short time, scripted figure had emerged from the opium den, and I was walking down the street with Sherlock Holmes. For 2 streets, he scuffled along with a bent back and an uncertain foot, like glancing quickly round. He straightened himself out and bursted in a hearty fit of laughter. "I suppose, Watson," said he, "that you imagine that I have added opium smoking to cocaine injections and all the other little weaknesses on which you have favored me with your medical views. Well, I was certainly surprised to find you there, but not more so than I to find you. I came to find a friend, and I to find an enemy." "An enemy?" "Yes, one of my natural enemies, or shall I say, my natural prey. Briefly, Watson, I'm in the midst of a very remarkable inquiry. I have hopes to find a crime in the incoherent rambling of these thoughts, as I have done before now. And I have been recognizing that dead my life would not have been worth an hour's purchase, for I have used it before now for my own purposes. And the Lasker, who runs it, has sworn to have vengeance upon me. There was a trapdoor at the back of that building, near the corner of halls, perhaps, which could tell some strange tales of what has passed through it upon the moonless nights. What? You do not mean bodies. Ah, bodies, Watson. You should be rich men if we had 1,000 pounds for every poor devil who has been done to death in that den. It is the vilest murder trap on the whole riverside, and I fear the Nashville St. Clair has entered it never to leave it more. But our trap should be here. He put his two forefingers between his teeth and whistled surely a signal which was answered by a similar whistle from the distance, followed shortly by the rattle of wheels and the clunk of horse hooves. Now, Watson, said Holmes, as a tall dog cart dashed up through the gloom, throwing out two golden tunnels of yellow light from its side lanterns. You'll come with me, won't you? If I can be of use. Oh, a trusted comrade is always of use. And a consular still more so. My room at the Setter's is a double-bedded one. The Setter's? Yes. That is Mr. St. Clair's house. I am staying there while I conduct the inquiry. Where is it then? Near Lee in Kent. We have a 7-mile drive before us. But I am all in the dark. Of course you are. You know all about it presently. Jump up there, alright? Alright, John. We shall not need you. Here's a half a crown. Look out for me tomorrow, about 11. Give her head. So long then. He flipped the horse with his whip, and we dashed away through the endless succession of somber and deserted streets, which widened gradually until we were flying across a broad, splash-dotted bridge, with the murky river flowing sluggishly beneath us. Beyond lay another dull wilderness, bricks and mortar, its silence broken only by the heavy regular footfall of the policeman or the songs and shouts of some belated party of revelers. A dull rack was drifting slowly across the sky. And they started to twinkle dimly here and there through the rifts of the clouds. Holmes, driving silent, with his head sunk upon his breast, in the air of a man who is lost in thought, while I sat beside him, curious to learn what this new quest might be which seemed to tax his power so sorely, and yet afraid to break in upon the current of his thoughts. We had driven several miles, and were beginning to get to the fringe of the belt of suburban villas, when he shook himself, shrugged his shoulders, and lit up his pipe with the air of a man who has satisfied himself that he is acting for the best. You have a grand gift of silence, Watson, said he. It makes you quite invaluable as a companion. Upon my word, it is a great thing for me to have someone to talk to. My own thoughts are not over pleasant. I was wondering what I should say to this dear little woman tonight when she meets me at the door. You forget that I know nothing about it. I shall just have time to tell you the facts of the case before we go to Lee. It seems absurdly simple, and yet somehow I can get nothing to go upon. There's plenty of thread, no doubt, but I can't get the end of it into my hand. Now, I'll state the case clearly and concisely to you, Watson, and maybe you can see a spark where all is dark to me. Proceed then. years ago, to be definite, is May 1884. There came a gentleman, Neville St. Clair by name, who appeared to have plenty of money. He took a large villa, laid out the grounds very nicely, and lived generally in a good style. By degree, he made friends in the neighborhood, and in 1887, he married the daughter of a local brewer, by whom he now has 2 children. He had no occupation, but was interested in several companies. Went into town as a rule in the morning, returning by the 5:14 from Cannon Street every night. Mr. St. Clair is now 37 years of age, is a man of temperament, habits, a good husband, and a very affectionate father, and a man who is popular with all who know him. I may add that his whole depth at the present moment, as far as we have been able to ascertain, amount to 88 pounds 10s. I'm guessing that's like shillings or something like that, I guess. While he has 220 pounds standing to his credit in the Capital and Countries Bank. There is no reason, therefore, to think that money troubles had been weighing upon his mind. Last Monday, Mr. Neville St. Clair went into town rather early than usual, remarking before he started that he had 2 important commissions to prepare, and that he would bring his little boy home a box of bricks. Now, by the merest chance, his wife received a telegram upon this same morning, very shortly after his departure, to the effect that a small parcel of considerable value, which she had been expecting, was waiting for her at the office of the Aberdeen Shipping Company. Now, if you are well up in your London, you will know that the office of the company is in Fresno Street, which branches out of the upper Swandam Lane, which you found me tonight. Miss St. Clair had her lunch, started for the city, did some shopping, proceeded to the company's office, got her package, and found herself at exactly 4:35 Rocket du Swandam Lane on her way back to the station. Have you followed me so far? It's very clear. If you remember, Monday was an exceedingly hot day, and Miss St. Clair walked slowly, glancing about in the hope of seeing a cab, as she did not like the neighborhood in which she found herself. While she was walking in this way down Swandam Lane, she suddenly heard an ejaculation or cry and was struck cold to see her husband looking down at her, and as it seemed to her, beckoning to her from a second-floor window. The window was open, and she quickly saw his face, which she describes as being terribly agitated. He waved his hands frantically to her, and then vanished from the window so suddenly that it seemed to her that he had been plucked back by some irresistible force from behind. One singular point which struck her quick feminine eyes was that although he wore some dark coat, such as he had started to town in, he had on neither collar nor necktie. Convinced that something was amiss with him, she rushed down the steps, for the house was none other than the opium den in which you found me tonight, and running through the front room, she attempted to ascend the stairs which led to the first floor. At the foot of the stairs, however, she met this Lascar scoundrel of whom I have spoken, who trusted her back and a bid by a Dan, who as insisted there, pushed her out into the street. Filled with the most maddening doubts and fear, she rushed down the lane and by rare good fortune met in Fresno Street a number of constables with an inspector, all on their way to the beat. Inspector and 2 men accompanied her back, and in spite of the continued resistance of the proprietor. They made their way to the room in which Mr. St. Clair had been last seen. There was no sign of him there. In fact, in the whole of that floor, there was no one to be found save a crippling wretch of a hideous aspect who had seen made his home there. Both he and the guard shortly swore that no one else had been in the front room during the afternoon. So determined was their denial that the inspector was staggered and had almost come to the belief that Miss St. Clair had been deluded when a cry she sprung at a small den box which lay upon the table and tore the lid from it. Out there fell a chassis of children's bricks. It was the toy which he had promised to bring home. This discovery and the evident confusion which the cripple showed made the inspector realize that the matter was serious. The rooms were carefully examined. The results all pointed to a abominable crime. The front room was plainly furnished as a sitting room that led into a small bedroom, which looked out upon the back of one of the roofs. Between the rafts and the bedroom window, the bedroom window is a narrow strip, which is dry at the low tide, but is covered at high tide with at least 4.5 feet of water. The bedroom window was a broad one and opened from below. On examination, traces of blood were to be seen upon the windowsill. Several scattered drops were visible upon the wooden floor of the bedroom. Thrust away behind a curtain in their front room were all the clothes of Mr. St. Clair, with the exception of his coat. His boots, his socks, his hat, and his watch, all were there. There was no sign of the violence upon any of these garments. There were no other traces of Mr. Neville St. Clair. Out of the window he must apparently have gone, for no other exit could be discovered, and the ominous blood stain upon the sill gave little promise that he could save himself by swimming, for the tide was at its very highest at the moment of the tragedy. And now, as to the villains who seemed to be immediately implicated in the matter. This guard was known to be a man of the vilest and tactics, but as by Miss St. Clair's story, he was known to have been at the foot of the stairs within a very few seconds of her husband's appearance at the window. He could hardly have been more than an accessory to the crime. His defense was one of absolute ignorance, and he protested that he had no knowledge as to the doing of Hugh Bone, his lodger, and that he could not account in any way for the presence of the missing gentleman's clothes. So much for the Lascar manager. Now for the sinister cripple who was living upon the second floor of the opium den, and who was certainly the last human being whose eyes rested upon Neville St. Clair. His name is Hugh Bone, and his hideous face is one which is familiar to every man who goes much to the city. He is a professional beggar, though in order to avoid the police regulation, he pretends to a small trade in wax vessels. Some little distance down Treadneedle Street, upon the left-hand side, there is, as you may have remarked, a small angle in the wall. Here is it that the creature takes his daily seat, cross-legged with his tiny stock of matches on his lap, and as he is a piteous spectre, a small rain of charity descends into the greasy leather cap which lies upon the pavement beside him. I have watched the fellow more than once before ever I thought of making his professional acquaintance, and I have been surprised at the harvest which he has reaped in a short time. His appearance, you see, is so remarkable that no one can pass him without observing him. Shocked, with orange hair, a pale face, disfigured by a horrible scar, which by its contraction has turned out the outer edge of his upper lip. A bulldog chain and a pair of very penetrating dark eyes, which present a singular contrast to the color of his hair. All mark him out from amid the common crowd of medicines, and so too does his wit, for he is ever ready with a reply to any piece of chaff which may be thrown at him by the passers-by. This is the man whom we now learn to have been the lodger at the open den, and to have been the last man to see the judgment of whom we are in quest. But a cripple? Said I. What could he have done single-handed against a man in the prime of his life? He is a cripple in the sense that he walks with a limp. But in other respects, he appears to be powerful and well-nurtured man. Surely your medical experience would tell you, Watson, that weakness in one limb is often compensated for by exceptional strength in others. Pray continue your narrative. Miss St. Clair had fainted at the sight of the blood upon the window, and she was escorted home in a cab by the police, as presence could be of no help to them in their investigation. Inspector Barton, who had charge of the case, made a very careful examination of the premises, without finding anything which threw any light upon the matter. One mistake had been made in not arresting Bowen instantly, as he was allowed some few minutes during which he might have communicated with his friend Lascar. But his fault was soon remedied, and he was seized and searched, without anything being found which could incriminate him. There were, it is true, some bloodstains upon his right shirt sleeve, but he pointed to his ring finger, which had been cut near the nail, and explained that the bleeding came from there, adding that he had been to the window long before. And that the stains which had been observed there came doubtless from the same source. He denied strenuously having ever seen Mr. Neville St. Clair, and swore that the presence of his clothes in his room was a much mystery to him as to the police. As to Miss St. Clair's assertion that she had actually seen her husband at the window, he declared that she must have been either mad or dreaming. He was removed, loudly protesting, to the police station, while the inspector remained upon the premises in hopes that the eating tide might afford some fresh clues. And it did, though. They hardly found upon the mud bank what they had feared to find. It was St. Clair's coat, and not Neville St. Clair, which lay uncovered as the tide receded. And what do you think they found in the pockets? I cannot imagine. No, I don't think he would guess. Every pocket stuffed with pennies and half pennies, 421 pennies, and 270 half pennies. It was no wonder that it had not been swept away by the tide, but a human body is a different matter. There is a fierce edit between the raft and the house. It seemed likely enough that the weighted coat had remained when the stripped body had been sucked away into the river. But I understand that all the other clothes were found in the room. Would the body be dressed in a coat alone? No, sir, but the facts might be met suspiciously enough. Suppose that this man Bone had thrust Neville St. Clair through the window. There was no human eyes which would have seen the deed. What would he do then? It would, of course, instantly strike him that he must get rid of the telltale garments. He would seize the coat, then be in the act of throwing it out, when it would occur to him that it would swim and not sink. He had little time, for he has heard the scuffle downstairs when the wife tried to force her way up, and perhaps he has already heard from this guard, Confederate, that the police are hurrying up the stairs. There is not an instant to be lost. He rushes to some secret hoard where he has accumulated the fruits of his beggary, and he stuffed all the coins upon which he can lay his hands into the pockets to make sure of the coat sinking. He throws it out and would have done the same with the other garments had he not heard the rush of steps below, and only just had time to close the window when the police appeared. It certainly sounds feasible. Well, we will take it as a working hypothesis. For the want of a better, Bourne, as I told you, was arrested and taken to the station, but it could not be shown that there had ever before been anything against him. He had for years been known as a professional beggar, but his life appeared to have been a very quiet and innocent one. There the matter stands at present, the questions which have to be solved. What Neville St. Clair was doing in the Up and Den? What happened to him when there? Where is he now? And what Hugh Bone had to do with his disappearance are all as far from a solution as ever. I confess that I cannot recall any case within my experience, which I looked at the first glance so simple and yet which presented such difficulties. While Sherlock Holmes had been detailing his singular series of events, we had been whirling through the outskirts of the great town until the last straggling houses had been left behind, and we rattled along with a country hedge upon either side of us. Just as he finished, however, we drove through two scattered villages, where a few lights still glimmered in the windows. "We are on the outskirts of Lee," said my companion. "We have touched on 3 English countries in our short drive, starting in Middlesex, passing over an angle of Surrey, and ending in Kent. See the light among the trees? This is the Setters, and besides that lamp sits a woman whose anxious ears have already, I have little doubt, caught the click of our horses' feet." "But why are you not conducted the case from Baker Street?" I asked. "Because there are many inquiries which must be made out here. Miss St. Clair has most kindly put 2 rooms at my disposal, and you may rest assured that she will have nothing but a welcome from my friend and colleague. I hate to meet her, Watson, when I have no news of her husband. Here we are. Whoa there, whoa." We had pulled up in front of the large villa, which stood within its own grounds. A stable boy had run out to the horse's head, and springing down, I lowered Holmes up to the small windy gravel drive, which led to the house. As we approached, the door flew open, and a little blonde woman stood in the open, clad in some sort of light mousseline de Zoe, with a touch of fluffy pink kaftan at her neck and wrist. She stood with her figure outlined against the flood of light, one hand upon the door, one half raised in her eagerness, her body slightly bent. Her head and face protruded, with eager eyes and parted lips, a standing question. "Well," she cried, "well?" And then, seeing that there were two of us, she gave a cry in hopes, which sank into a grunt as she saw that my companion shook his head and shrugged his shoulders. "No good news? None. No bad? No. Thank God for that. But come in. You must be weary, for you have had a long day." "This is my friend, Dr. Watson. He has been a most valuable use to me in several of my cases, and a lucky chance he has made it possible for me to bring him out and associate him with this investigation." "I am delighted to see you," said she, pressing my hands warmly. "You will, I am sure, forgive anything that may be wanting in our arrangements when you consider the blow which has come so suddenly upon us." "My dear madam," said I am an old companion, and if I were not, I can very well see that no apology is needed. If I could be of any assistance either to you or to my dear friend here, I should be indeed happy." "Now, Mr. Sherlock Holmes," said the lady as we entered a well-lit dining room, upon the table of which a cold supper had been laid out, "I should very much like to ask you one or two plain questions to which I beg that you will give a plain answer." "Certainly, madam. Do not tremble about my feelings. I am not hysterical, nor given to fainting. I simply wish to hear your real opinion." "Upon what point?" "In your heart of hearts, do you think that Neville is alive?" Sherlock Holmes seemed to be embarrassed by the question. "Frankly now," she repeated, standing upon the rug, looking keenly down at him as he leaned back in a basket chair. "Frankly then, madam, I do not." "You think that he is dead?" "I do." "Murdered?" "I don't say that, perhaps." "And on what day did he meet his death?" "On Monday." "Then perhaps, Mr. Holmes, you will be good enough to explain how is it that I have received a letter from him today?" Sherlock Holmes sprang out of his chair as if he had been galvanized. "What?" "Yes, today," he roared. "Yes, today." She stood smiling, holding up a little slip of paper in the air. "May I see it?" "Certainly." He snatched it from her in his eagerness and smoothed it out upon the table. He drew over the lamp and examined it intently. I had left my chair and was gazing at it over his shoulder. The envelope was a very coarse one. It was stamped with the Gravesend postmark and with the date of that very day, or rather of the day before, for it was considerably after midnight. "Coarse writing," murmured Holmes. "Surely this is not your husband's writing, madam." "No, but the enclosure is." I perceived also that whoever addressed the envelope had to go and inquire as to the address. How can you tell that? And the name, you see, is in perfectly black ink, which has dried itself. The rest is of a grayish color, which shows that blotting paper had been used. If it had been written straight off and then blotted, none would be of a deep black shade. This man had written the name, and there has then been a pause before he wrote the address, which can only mean that he was not familiar with it. It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles. Now let us now see the letter. There has been an enclosure here. Yes, there was a ring. His signet ring. And you are sure that this is your husband's hand? One of his hands. One. His hand when he wrote hurriedly. It is very unlike his usual writing, and yet I know it well. Dearest, do not be frightened. All will come well. There is a huge error which it may take some time to ratify. Wait is patience. Neville. Written in pencil upon the flyleaf of a book. Octavo size, no watermark. Posted today, a gravesend by a man with a dirty thumb. Ha. And the flap has been gummed. I am not very much in error by a person who had been chewing tobacco. You have no doubt that it is your husband's hand, madam. None. I never wrote those words. And they were posted today at Gravesend. Well, Miss St. Clair, clouds lightened, though I should not venture to say that the danger is over. But he must be alive, Mr. Holmes. Unless this is a clever forgery to put us on the wrong scent. The ring, after all, proves nothing. It may have been taken from him. No. It is his very own writing. Very well. It may, however, have been written on Monday and only posted today. That is possible. If so, much may have happened between. Oh, you must not discourage me, Mr. Holmes. Know that all is well with him. There is so keen a sympathy between us that I should know if evil came upon him. On the very day that I saw him last, he caught himself in the bedroom, and yet I, in the dining room, rushed upstairs instantly with the utmost certainty that something had happened. Do you think that I would respond to such a trifle and yet be ignorant of his death? I have seen too much not to know that the impression of a woman may be more valuable than the conclusion as an analytical reasoner. And this letter, you certainly have a very strong piece of evidence to corroborate your views. But if your husband is alive and able to write letters, why should he remain away from you? I cannot imagine. It is unthinkable. And on Monday, he made no remarks before leaving you? No. And you were surprised to see him at Swan Lane? Very much so. Was the window open? Yes. Then he might have called to you. He might. He only, as I understand, gave an articulate cry? Yes. A call for help, you thought? Yes. He waved his hands. But it might have been a cry of surprise. An astonishment at the unexpected sight of you might cause him to throw up his hands. It is possible. And you thought he was pulled back? He disappeared so suddenly. He might have leaped back. You did not see anyone else in the room? No, but this horrible man confessed to having been there. And the last car was at the foot of the stairs. Not quite so. Your husband, as far as you could see, had his ordinary clothes on. But without his collar or tie, I distinctly saw his bare throat. Had he ever spoken of Swan Lane? Never. Had he ever shown any signs of having taken opium? Never. Thank you, Miss Sinclair. And those are the practical points about which I wish to be absolutely clear. We should now have a little supper and then retire, for we may have a very busy day tomorrow. A large and comfortable double-bedded room had been placed at our disposal, and I was quickly between the sheets, for I was weary after my night of adventure. Sherlock Holmes was a man, however, who, when he had an unsolved problem upon his mind, would go for days and even for a week without rest, turning it over, rearranging his facts, looking at it from every point of view, till he had either phantomed it or convinced himself that his data were insufficient. It was soon evident to me that he was now preparing for an all-night sitting. He took off his coat and waistcoat, put on a large blue dressing gown, and then wandered about the room collecting pillows from his bed and cushions from the sofa and armchairs. With these, he constructed a sort of Eastered divan upon which he perched himself cross-legged with an ounce of sack tobacco and a box of matches laid out in front of him. In the dim light of the lamp, I saw him sitting there, an old fire pipe between his lips, his eyes fixed vacantly upon the corner of the ceiling, the blue smoke curling up from him, silent, motionless, with the light shining upon his strong set, inclined features. So he sat as I drooped off to sleep, and so he sat when a sudden erection caused me to wake up, and I found the summer sun shining into the apartment. Pipe was still between his lips, smoke still curling upward, and the room was full of dense tobacco haze. But nothing remained of the heap of shack which I had seen upon the previous night. "Awake, Watson?" he asked. "Yes." "Game for a morning drive?" "Certainly." "Then dress. No one is stirring yet, but I know where the stable boy sleeps, and we shall soon have the trap out." He chuckled to himself as he spoke. His eyes twinkled, and he seemed a different man to the somber thinker of the previous night. As I dressed, I glanced at my watch. It was no wonder that no one was stirring. It was 25 minutes past 4. I had hardly finished when Holmes returned with the news that the boy was putting in the horse. "I want to test a little theory of mine," said he, pulling on his boots. "I think, Watson, that you are now standing in the presence of one of the most absolute fools in Europe. I deserve to be kicked from here to Charing Cross, but I think I have the key of the affair now." "And where is it?" I asked, smiling. "In the bathroom," he answered. "Oh yes, I am not joking," he continued, seeing my look of incredulity. "I have just been there, and I have taken it out, and I have got it in this Gladstone bag. Come on, my boy. We shall see. Rather, it will not fit the lock." We made our way downstairs as quietly as possible and out into the bright morning sunshine. In the road stood our horse and trap, with a half-class stable boy waiting at the head. We both sprung in, and away we dashed down the London road. A few country carts were stirring, bearing the vegetables to the metropolis, but the lane of villas on either side were as silent and lifeless as some city in a dream. "It has been at some point a singular case," said Holmes, flickering the horse on into a gallop. "I confess that I have been as blind as a mole, but it is better to learn wisdom late than never to learn it at all." In town, the earliest risers were just beginning to look sleepily from their windows as we drove through the streets of the Surrey side. Passing down the Waterloo Bridge Road, we crossed over the river, dashing up only 10th Street, wheeled sharply to the right, and found ourselves in Bow Street. Sherlock Holmes was well known to the force, and the two constables at the door saluted him. One of them held the horse's head, while the other let us in. "Who is on duty?" asked Holmes. "Inspector Bradstreet, sir." "Ah, Bradstreet, how are you?" A tall straw had come down the stone-flagged passage in a key cap, a frock jacket. "I wish to have a quick word with you, Bradstreet." "Certainly, Mr. Holmes." "Come to my room here." It was a small office-like room, with a huge ledger upon the table and a phone projecting from the wall. The inspector sat down at his desk. "What can I do for you, Mr. Holmes?" "I called about the beggar man-bone, the one who was charged with being concerned in the disappearance of Mr. Neville St. Clair of Lee." "Yes, he was brought up and reprimanded for the further inquiries." "So I heard. You have him here?" "In the cells." "Is he quiet?" "Oh, he gives no trouble, but he is a dirty scoundrel." "Dirty?" "Yes, it is all we can do to make him wash his hands and his face. It's as black as a thinker. Well, when once his case has been settled, he will have a regular prison bath, and I think, if you saw him, you would agree with me that he needed it." "I would like to see him very much." "Would you?" "It is easily done. Come this way. You can leave your bag." "No, I think that I'll take it." Very good. Come this way, if you please." He led us down the passage, opened a bar door, passed down a winding stair, and brought us to a whitewashed corridor with a line of door on each side. "The third on the right, it is," said the inspector. "Here it is." He quietly shot back a panel in the upper part of the door and glanced through. "He is asleep," said he. "You can see him very well." We all put our eyes to the grating. The prisoner lay with his face towards us, in a very deep sleep, breathing slowly and heavily. He was a middle-sized man, coarsely clad, as becoming his calling, with a colored shirt protruding through the rent, and his tattered cloak, and tattered coat. He was, as the inspector had said, extremely dirty, but the grime which covered his face could not conceal its repulsive ugliness. A broad wheal from an old scar ran right across it from eye to chin, and by its contraction had been turned up one side of the upper lip, so that 3 teeth were exposed in a peculiar snarl. A shock of very bright red hair grew low over his eyes and forehead. "He is a beauty, isn't he?" said the inspector. "He certainly needs a wash," remarked Holmes. "I had an idea that he might, and I took the liberty of bringing the tool with me." He opened the Gladstone bag as he spoke, and took out, to my astonishment, a very large bath sponge. "You are a funny one," chuckled the inspector. "Now, if you will have the great goodness to open that door very quietly, we will soon make him cut a much more respectable figure." "Well, I don't know why not," said the inspector. "He doesn't look a credit to the Bow Street cells, does he?" He slipped his key into the lock, and we all very quietly entered the cell. The sleeper half turned, and then settled down once more into deep slumber. Holmes stooped to the water jug, moistened his sponge, and then rubbed it twice vigorously across and down the prisoner's face. "Let me introduce you," he shouted, to Mr. Neville St. Clair of Lee, in the county of Kent. Never in my life have I seen such a sight. The man's face peeled off. Never have I seen such a sight. The man's face peeled off under the sponge. Oh, wait, hold on. The man's face peeled under the sponge, like the bark from a tree, gone with the coarse brown tint, gone too with the horrid scar which had seamed it across. and the twisted lips, which had given the repulsive sneer to the face. A twitch brought away the tinged red hair, and there, sitting up in his bed, was a pale, sad-faced, refined-looking man, black-haired and smooth skin, rubbing his eyes and staring about him with sleep, bewilderment. Then suddenly realizing the exposure, he broke into a scream and threw himself down with his face to the pillow. "Great heavens," said the inspector. "It is indeed the missing man. I know him from the photograph." The prisoner turned with the reckless air of a man who abandoned himself to his destiny. "Be it so," said he, "and pray what I am charged with." Was making way with Mr. Neville saying, "Oh, come, you can't be charged with that unless you make a case of attempted suicide of it," said the inspector with a grin. "Well, I have been 27 years in the force, but this really takes the cake. If I am Mr. Neville Sinclair, then it is obvious that no crime has been committed, and that therefore I am illegally detained." "No crime, but a very great error has been committed," said Holmes. "You would have done better to have trusted your wife." "It was not the wife, it was the children," groaned the prisoner. "God help me. I would not have them ashamed of their father. My God. What an exposure. What can I do?" Sherlock Holmes sat down beside him on the couch and patted him kindly on the shoulder. "If you leave it to the court of law to clear the matter up," said he, "of course you can hardly avoid publicity. On the other hand, if you convinced the police authorities that there is no possible case against you, I do not know that there is any reason that the details should find their way into the papers. Inspector Bradstreet would, I am sure, make notes upon anything which you might tell us and submit it to the proper authorities. The case would then never go into court at all." "God bless you," cried the prisoner passionately. "I would have endured imprisonment, aye, even execution, rather than have left my miserable secret as a family blot to my children." "You are the first who have ever heard my story. My father was a schoolmaster in Chesterfield, which I received an excellent education. I traveled in my youth, took the stage, and finally became a reporter on an evening paper in London. One day my editor wished to have a series of articles upon begging in the metropolis, and I volunteered to supply them. There was a point from which all my adventures started. I was only by trying begging as an amateur that I would get the facts upon which to base my articles. When after I had, of course, learned all the secrets of making up and had been famous in the green room for my skill, I took advantage now of my attainments. I painted my face, and to make myself as pitiable as possible, I made a good scar and fixed one side of my lip in a twist by the aid of a small slip of flesh-colored plaster. Then, with a red head of hair and an appropriate dress, I took my station in the business part of the city. As sensible as a match seller, but really as a beggar. For 7 hours, I plied my trade, and when I returned home in the evening, I found to my surprise that I had received no less than 26s for D. I don't know what those are supposed to be. I wrote my article and thought little more of the matter until sometime later. I backed a bill for a friend and had a wit served upon me for £25. I was at my wit's end where to get the money. By some idea came to me. I begged for a night's grace from the creditor, asked for a holiday from my employer, and spent the time in begging in the city under my disguise. In 10 days, I had the money and I paid the debt. Well, you can imagine how hard it was to settle down to arduous work at £2 a week when I knew that I could earn as much in a day by smearing my face with a little paint, laying my cap on the ground, and sitting still. It was a long fight between my pride and the money, but the dollars won at last, and I threw up reporting and sat day after day in the corner which I had first chosen, inspiring pity by my ghastly face and filling my pockets with copper. Only one man knew my secret. He was the keeper of the low den in which I used to lounge in Swandam Lane, where I could every morning emerge as a laundry beggar and in the evening transform myself into a well-dressed man about town. This fellow Scar was well paid by me for his rooms, so that I knew that my secret was safe in his possession. Well, very soon I found that I was saving considerable sums of money. I do not mean that any beggar in the streets of London could earn £700 a year, which is less than my average takes. But I had exceptional advantages in my power of making up, and also in a facility of repartee, which improved by practice and made me quite a recognized character in the city. All day, a stream of pennies, varies by silver, poured in upon me, and it was a very bad day in which I failed to take £2. As I grew richer, I grew more ambitious, took a house in the country, and eventually married, without anyone having a suspicion as to my real occupation. My dear wife knew that I had a business in the city. She little knew that what. Last Monday, I had finished for the day and was dressing in my room about the opium den when I looked out the window and saw, to my horror and astonishment, that my wife was standing in the window in the street, with her eyes fixed upon me. I gave a cry of surprise, threw up my arms to cover my face, and rushing to my confidant, Lascar, entreated him to prevent anyone from coming up to me. I heard her voice downstairs, but I knew that she could not send. Swiftly, I threw off my clothes, pulled on those of the beggar, and put on my pigments and wig. Even a wife's eyes could not pierce so complete a disguise. But then it occurred to me that there might be a search in the room, and that the clothes might betray me. I threw open the window, reopened, and by my violence, a small cut which I had inflicted upon myself in the bedroom that morning. Then I seized my coat, which was weighed by the copper, which I had just transferred to it from the leather bag in which I carried my takings. I hurled it out of the window, and it disappeared into the Thames. The other clothes would have followed, but at the moment, there was a rush of constables up the stairs, and a few minutes after I found, I confess to my relief, that instead of being identified as Mr. Neville St. Clair, I was arrested as his murderer. I do not know that there is anything else for me to explain. I was determined to preserve my disguise as long as possible, and hence my preference for a dirty face. Knowing that my wife would be terribly anxious, I slipped off my ring and confided it to Lascar at the moment when no constable was watching me, together with a hurried squirrel, telling her that she had no cause to fear. That note only reached her yesterday, said Holmes. Good God. What a week she must have spent. The police have watched this Lascar, said Inspector Bradstreet, and I can't quite understand that he might find it difficult to post a letter unobserved. Probably he handed it to some sailor customer of his, or forgot all about it for some days. That was it, said Holmes. nodding approvingly. I have no doubt of it. But have you never been prosecuted for begging? Many times. But what was a fine to me? I must stop here, however, said Bradstreet. If the police are to hush these things up, there must be no more of Hugh Bone. I have sworn it by the most solemn oaths which a man can take. In that case, I think that is probable that no further steps may be taken. But if you are found again, then all must come out. I am sure, Mr. Holmes, that we are very much indebted to you for having cleared the matter up. I wish I knew how you reached your results. I reached this one, said my friend, by sitting upon 5 pillows and consuming an ounce of sag. I think, Watson, that if we drive to Baker Street, we shall just be in time for breakfast.